Welcome back to Mana Central. I'm Sam.
And I'm Kenny. On this week's video, we'll be discussing some of our advanced deck building techniques and tips.
Tip number 1. Build what you love. It's important as a Magic the Gathering player to recognize the archetypes, deck styles, and deck builds that you enjoy actually playing with when you sit down to play Magic.
Right, so generally I like to play with green and white decks. I really build a lot around that because of the life gain, the big creatures, the fun ramping of your armies that you can just cover your board with. It's really quite enjoyable.
And I tend to take a more control-oriented aspect when I play the game. I like making sure that I can lock my opponent's creatures down or prevent them from casting spells in the first place.
Yeah. Your gameplay styles have tended to be a little on the nuisance side, especially just because I like to not be under somebody else's control, scrutiny, whatever you might want to call it. It's a lot of fun not having to be told to discard a card or not play something that I really want to play. You know, it's like, nope.
And it's a lot of fun for me to tell him to not play those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's... But seriously though, build the things that you love the most, because, you know, trying to branch out in other things that you're just not as passionate about, the decks are going to feel a little bit lacking.
Absolutely. I agree. Even some of the strongest decks in the format, if you don't like the playstyle, you might end up not enjoying the match, even if you end up winning.
And to top that off, there are plenty of decks out there that are, like you said, plenty powerful, but you might not really feel the strategy or enjoy the strategy behind the deck enough to be able to play it well because you just don't care enough about it. You know, you don't feel the passion for it that you would if you were playing something that you truly enjoyed.
Absolutely.
Tip number 2. We're going to contradict ourselves a little bit here, but you should really branch out and play a little bit of something that you're not so comfortable with.
That's right. Every once in a while, it doesn't hurt to splash a color that you may not have tried before, or even try a new deck that you haven't tried in the past. It's always nice to experience what a new deck has to offer and see things from a different angle.
And see what other colors can kind of offer as well. You know, just as much as I don't care for control, blue has its moments. It really does. I mean, there's things where you get to take extra turns, and there's other things where you get to like counter stuff and scry. I mean, I'll admit that scrying is something I enjoy, and that's a really blue mechanic.
Absolutely. And I also enjoy a red deck wins every once in a while, or a solid burn deck. It's all about expanding your horizons and learning how to play every aspect of Magic.
Yeah, definitely. You know, there's only things that you can learn from branching out just a little bit.
Tip number 3. Take from existing proven decks. If a deck has a strategy that works particularly well for that certain type of build, there's no reason you shouldn't incorporate it into your own strategy when you're making your decks. If you're building an Abzan deck, there's no reason you should not run 4 Siege Rhinos. And if your deck includes green in the current standard meta, there's no reason you shouldn't be running Courser of Kruphix.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit that I'm not the greatest deck builder out there. But there are many channels, many outlets where you can actually find the current tournament decks that are coming from Star City Games, Channel Fireball, and even like the Pro Tour and the Pro Qualifiers for Wizards of the Coast. Those decks kind of give you an insight on what to build off of in order to make yourself competitive.
Absolutely. You can use net decking not only to improve your own decks, but also to analyze the current meta and determine the types of decks that you'll be playing against.
Exactly.
Keep in mind that these tournament level decks can be very expensive, especially if you're trying to be extremely competitive. A lot of these decks will use cards that can sometimes break the bank or your wallet unless you're somehow bankrolling Magic.
Yeah, seriously. You know, most of it's stemming from the lands that these players use in their decks, you know, some of the non-basic lands.
Especially Modern. Modern has some very expensive lands.
You know, and the hope is that you'll just manage to get lucky with some boosters, some fat backs, maybe even a booster box. And again, it gets more and more expensive as you go down the line there, but you're hoping to get some of these cards that you wouldn't ordinarily get just by paying out for them. So just keep in mind though that when you're playing with these kinds of decks, if you're net decking from some of the tournament stuff, you're going to come across some things that are relatively expensive, and the best thing you can do is just try and substitute whatever you can in order non-basic lands, really. Or,
Absolutely.
You know, there's some other cards out there that can tend to get pretty expensive, and sometimes it's fun to see if you can manage to play a deck like that without that card.
And Kenny and I have two very differing opinions on this. Kenny enjoys booster boxes and fat packs and opening boosters, where I tend to think that buying the individual cards is the better route.
It definitely can be. I'll admit that. It's sometimes very beneficial to just buy a play set of a given card rather than hoping to get it out of a booster pack.
But it's a lot less fun.
It has its moments.
Cracking packs is pretty awesome.
Yeah. That's the half of the fun is sifting through those first 14 cards to see what that rare is, and then there's people like Sam here who just open a pack. Hey, this is the rare I got. Yeah.
Which leads us into, make sure to stay tuned for our Battle for Zendikar booster box opening.
Yeah, that'll be fun to watch. Tip number 4, playtest with your friends. It's really important that when you're building a new deck, you get out there and you actually test it out. Never assume that the deck that you've built is going to just jump in and be competitive right out of the sleeve, because it's not. I mean, realistically, unless you're pulling from a tournament deck and you're matching it perfectly, which, of course, that's not, technically your own, you got to play test with your friends.
Absolutely. It's important to take your deck to several Friday Night Magics, to play test with people who are in your local play group, if you have friends that you get together to play, with the intention to make sure that your deck is top-notch before you even go to any type of professional level event.
It's important to play test with not only your friends, but people at your local game store or your Friday Night Magics. Doing so will allow you to have an opportunity to play against somebody that you haven't been able to anticipate their play style. You don't know what kind of decks they're going to be playing, and it's not like just your casual friends that you play with that you're like, oh yeah, no, I know this person's going to play a burn deck or a control deck, or like my friends at my play group, one of them really, really loves artifacts.
I completely agree. It's very important to make sure that your deck has run the gamut, so to speak, of all the potential decks it could come across in that particular format. Tip number 5, construct a deck library. For those of you who might not know what a deck library is, you basically proxy up some of the most powerful and popular decks in a particular format. Then you use those decks to play test against your own decks to make sure that when your deck comes up against some of the top decks, it has what it needs to do to win.
And building a deck library can be pretty labor intensive. You're building these proxies out of, just regular print paper, and we recommend usually slapping them in a sleeve with a land behind them, just to kind of give them that little extra, stiffness to feel like a real Magic card. But it allows you the opportunity to really get in there and have all the cards you would need in order to play against decks that are legitimately competitive.
Not only do you need to take the time to sleeve up these decks, you also need to stay on top of the current meta to find out which decks are winning consistently and what specific builds they're winning with.
Right, absolutely.
All in all, I think it is worth the effort in the end to at least put something together to run your deck through, because even if you're just by yourself, you can still play with your deck library.
Thanks for joining us here this week at Mana Central. We hope you enjoyed our video on tips about advanced deck building.
Please feel free to leave a comment if there's a video topic you would like us to do in the future, or a subject you would like us to address in an upcoming video.
And be sure to subscribe so that you can see that upcoming video, because we'll be posting content weekly.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Ruined by Cat Bell.